Growth has halved and unemployment has surged. Is this what the Prime Minister meant when he tweeted that the economy is improving? Yes. 2 weeks ago, he was crowing about his historic trade deal and how he got 0% tariffs on steel. Now the steel industry will face 25% tariffs unless he does exactly what President Trump tells him to. It is chaos, chaos, chaos.
We're the only country in the world that isn't paying the 50% tax on steel. Coming down. We are working on it to bring it down to zero. That is going to happen.
Order. Please, let's listen to the answer, even if you don't believe you're getting one. It is how the Prime Minister wishes.
Everything he has said this afternoon is total nonsense. Obfuscation, avoiding the question. He doesn't have any answers. It's disgraceful.
It's been opposed by our adversaries, Russia, China and Iran. And into that column we have reform, presumably following Putin, and the Tories following reform.
They assumed the battle for Brexit was finished, that the public had checked out, worn down and looking elsewhere. But out of sight a storm had been gathering, and now it has erupted into the most explosive political scandal of the year. Within the guarded walls of Buckingham Palace, an extraordinary confrontation took place. King Charles, a figure famous for staying above partisan warfare, firmly but quietly blocked a Covert EU summit that had been carefully arranged by Starmer's inner circle. Yet the real shock was not simply the King's refusal. It was who he chose to receive instead, Nigel Farage. Yes, the very man written off by the establishment, ridiculed by pundits, and assumed to be banished from the corridors of power. But he is back. And this time, he is anything but silent.
You know what he's got, Andrew? He's got non-player character energy. Do you know what that means?
No.
NPC. Unfortunately, it's NPC is non-player character. Main player character is your charismatic leader with loads of riz. He's not got that.
He is a charisma viper.
While Starmer plotted in secret to quietly pull Britain back into Brussels' grip, Farage stood firm in the King's presence. The moment was hushed, but the signal was thunderous. Brexit still lives, and anyone attempting to dismantle it behind closed doors would face consequences. This was not merely a political scuffle. It was a royal intervention, and it carried the potential to change everything. For months, tension had been building in Westminster. Murmurs, half reports, and a trail of unexplained meetings pointed to something far more serious. A coordinated effort to subtly unwind Britain's departure from the EU. And at the heart of it stood Keir Starmer. The man who once faced the cameras pledging to respect the will of the people had, away from those same cameras, been carving out a very different route. According to senior insiders, Starmer and his closest advisors had engaged in quiet talks with EU officials, laying the foundations for a backdoor return to European oversight. There were no press conferences, no parliamentary scrutiny, only late-night encounters, sealed room conversations, and unsigned drafts that never surfaced in public view.
Very good he's standing in for the member for Clacton, I have to say. There was no sign of him yesterday at the EU. So he was the first through the E-gates somewhere to south of France. Nice work if you can get it.
The plan was to restore free movement for EU citizens, hand back regulatory control over trade and migration, and realign borders, all without the public ever knowing. It would be a quiet return, a reversal of Brexit carried out without Parliament's consent and without a single word to the Crown. It was audacious, it was covert, and it was about to collapse spectacularly. Because no secret stays buried forever. Fragments began to surface, an email here, a whispered warning there. Journalists started closing in, and eventually those low murmurs reached Buckingham Palace. King Charles, normally reserved in political matters, took notice. What he discovered unsettled him deeply. A hidden attempt to override the referendum, and steer Britain back toward EU rules without a public vote. This was not just contentious, it threatened the constitutional balance itself. This was no longer simple politics, it was sovereignty. The king had a duty, and he was not prepared to see it sidelined. So he moved. He convened senior advisors and prepared to step in. But he could not do it alone. He needed a voice, someone willing to confront Keir Starmer's operation directly, someone the public still trusted to defend what they had voted for. So he reached out to the one figure Westminster had tried to erase, Nigel Farage. For years, Farage had been written off, dismissed as yesterday's man. Yet at the moment of highest stakes, it was Farage who was called to the palace, not as a visitor, but as a guardian of the public will. He arrived quietly, no cameras, no entourage, just himself and a folder packed with hard truths. Behind palace walls, he laid everything bare: documents, messages, and confidential evidence of Starmer's discreet EU dealings, promises made behind Parliament's back, frameworks drafted without oversight. And in that moment, the king decided. The man who delivered Brexit had returned to the palace to halt Starmer's betrayal. Farage's briefing left no ambiguity. Starmer was not merely talking, he was coordinating a full-scale return to EU control, quietly, unlawfully, and without the consent of the people. The king listened, then spoke with resolve. This ends now. There was no announcement, no royal broadcast, only swift, decisive action taken behind closed doors. Starmer's plan, once drifting unchallenged through the corridors of power, had been brought to a dead stop by the only authority capable of doing it, the Crown. But this was never just about blocking a single summit. It was about protecting the foundation of a democratic choice. The king made it unmistakably clear that no secret bargain and no elite backroom negotiation would be allowed to undo what the people had voted for, that Britain's freedom, secured by the resolve of millions, was not for sale. By sunrise, the story spread like wildfire. Something had happened at the palace, something seismic, and at the heart of it all was Farage. Overnight, he was no longer just a familiar face on talk shows. He was the man who had met the king in secret. The man who knew the full truth. Headlines detonated, social media erupted, and in pubs, cafes and offices across Britain, the same question echoed again and again. What exactly had the king and Farage uncovered? Starmer stayed silent, but silence was no longer protection. The tide had turned. Farage was back, stronger, louder, and finally impossible to ignore, while Starmer was losing his grip by the minute. The British public, already exhausted by political doublespeak, could sense deceit, and Starmer, ensnared in his own web, was heading toward the wrath of the king, the fury of Farage, and the anger of the British people converging on Downing Street. Panic set in. When Starmer first heard whispers of the king's involvement, he dismissed them until confirmation landed with brutal force. Not only had Charles shut down his EU strategy, he had brought Farage directly into the fold. Starmer's reaction was total meltdown. He barricaded himself with advisors, barking demands for answers. Phones lit up across Brussels, instructions fired off in every direction: contain the leak, bury the headlines, seize control of the narrative. But it was already over. Reporters flooded government buildings, anonymous tips poured in, and it became clear someone on the inside had spoken. The truth was now everywhere. His scheme to quietly steer Britain back under EU authority, to erase Brexit without public consent, was disintegrating in real time. Inside Number 10, the atmosphere curdled. Starmer stormed the corridors, shouting at aides, demanding to know who had betrayed him. Every laptop was suspect. Every staffer a potential enemy. Loyalty evaporated. Paranoia took hold, and one question haunted the chaos. How had a strategy so carefully concealed for months slipped through his fingers and ended up in the hands of the King and Nigel Farage of all people? The same man he had written off as finished was now standing at the heart of a royal intervention, and Starmer could hardly process the reality of it. His opponents had closed in far faster than he ever expected, and what made it worse was that the silence inside the palace had been broken deliberately. Sources said the King had not merely listened, he had made his stance unmistakably clear. Brexit was not open to quiet revision, and any attempt to reverse it without public consent was unacceptable. Starmer understood the implication instantly. The monarch had drawn a line in the sand, one no Prime Minister was permitted to cross, not with a parliamentary majority, not even under the banner of diplomacy. Now the Crown had taken its stand. The King's words carried lethal weight. He would not remain silent while the will of the British people, their demand for freedom from Brussels, was stolen by stealth. And just when Starmer believed the situation could not deteriorate further, it did. Whistleblowers inside Whitehall began releasing explosive material, internal memos, confidential emails, even draft agreements that confirmed everything. Starmer's team had spent months constructing a pact to bind the UK back to U-trade and migration rules, a Brexit reversal buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. There would be no public vote, no referendum, only discreet signatures hidden in dense legal language designed to pass unnoticed. The press descended instantly. Headlines screamed betrayal, social media erupted into chaos. Talk radio crackled with calls for resignations. Starmer tried to deny it until the tapes emerged. Secret recordings surfaced of senior Labour figures ridiculing the public, insisting outrage would fade once the economy improved. It was icy, arrogant, and it confirmed every suspicion. The betrayal was not accidental, it was deliberate. In a matter of hours, Starmer shifted from embattled to fully exposed. As Labour scrambled to contain the fallout, Farage moved in the opposite direction. He surged forward, armed with documents, testimony and public fury, taking to the airwaves and Parliament with a single message: the people had been lied to, and Brexit had nearly been erased behind their backs. Crowds rallied around him. Donations poured in. Reform UK rocketed in the polls, even overtaking Labour in several key constituencies. This was no longer a comeback, it was a revolt, and at the centre of it all, the King stood firm. Inside the palace, he delivered a warning few had anticipated. Starmer's plan had crossed a constitutional line, and the Crown would not remain neutral. Senior ministers were stunned. Even MI5 reportedly began drawing up contingency plans in case the government collapsed. Within 72 hours of that secret palace meeting, Britain was plunged into a full-blown political crisis, and Starmer, once seen as steady and pragmatic, was now clinging to power by a single thread. Then came the moment that changed everything. King Charles, long seen as a silent figure above the fray, issued a private royal command summoning Starmer to Buckingham Palace. No press, no advisors, just the monarch and the Prime Minister face to face. Insiders say the rebuke was merciless. You do not rule the people, you serve them. Starmer attempted to frame the secret talks as exploratory, but Charles would hear none of it. He accused the Prime Minister of jeopardising the Crown's neutrality and undermining the public's trust in democracy. Starmer left pale, rattled and defeated. By the time he returned to Downing Street, calls for his resignation were already flooding in. Labour MPs leaked internal memos. Tories drafted censure motions. Protesters swarmed Parliament Square. The hashtag #StopStarmer trended for hours. And Farage? He waited outside the palace, brandishing a thick folder of evidence, declaring that this era of betrayal was over. This wasn't just political fallout, it was a reckoning. The entire nation was now awake, and even lifelong Labour supporters felt betrayed.